In this lesson, we're going to look at media queries in HTML5. Media queries allow a web page to be responsive depending on the type of device it's displayed on. For example, at the moment here, I have a sample document, and as you can see, it has hyperlinks on the left-hand side, and some images, and it has an aside. And I've designed this page so that it looked good on a widescreen browser on a desktop. Now, the font here is sans serif, and that's usually what you use when you're displaying stuff on the screen. But when you're printing, you might want it to look differently. So I've set up a media query rule that defines different style sheets and different style sheet rules for the printer. So in Google Chrome, I can do Control-P to bring up the printer window. The printer window conveniently shows a preview of what it's going to look like when it's printed. So there are a few key differences here. You'll notice that the hyperlinks haven't been displayed. I've set up a rule that says the navigation area should not be displayed if the device is a printer, because what's the point of displaying hyperlinks on a printed page? Also, if you look closely, you'll see that the font here is a serif font, like Times Roman. Because often when you're printing on a page, you use a serif font, whereas when you display on the screen, you use sans serif. So I've got two different style sheets, one that applies for the screen and one that applies for the printer. I've used media query rules to specify when each style sheet should be applied. I just press escape to cancel the print preview. One other capability in this example is for your application web page to display itself differently based on the characteristics and the capabilities of the device that you're displaying on. I've set up a rule that says when the window gets too narrow, it should hide the images on the web page. Watch what happens now. I'll take the edge of my window, and as the window gets smaller, when it reaches a critical point, there. I set up a rule that listens on the capabilities of the device so that when the width goes below a certain threshold, it hides the images from the screen. I've also displayed a message here to indicate that the figures have been hidden. If I make the window bigger again, then it displays the figures, and I've got another message showing that. So let's see how this works. I have Komodo Edit open. There are 4 files we're going to look at, and again, all of these files are in your project files folder. First of all, we have the HTML document itself, and then we have several style sheets to show how to define different rules for different types of device. So the first key point, in the HTML document itself, I've linked in 2 separate style sheets. The first style sheet will only be applied when the web page is viewed on the screen. So when I view it in my web browser, this style sheet is used. There's a media attribute that you can define on your link element, and you can specify what type of device to aim for. So here are some of the common media devices that you can specify: screen, print, all, braille, handheld, projection, and TTY. The most commonly used ones, in my experience, tend to be the screen, the printer, and a handheld device. So when I'm viewing this web page on the screen, it'll automatically link in that style sheet. When I'm viewing on a printer, it'll use this one instead, because this rule applies when the media type is print. So let's take a look at these 2 different style sheets: screen style sheet and print style sheet. So screen style sheet looks like this. So the body will use as its font one of these sans serif fonts specified here, based on which one the browser wants to use. For the print style sheet, it uses a different font family. It uses a serif font, such as Times New Roman. Now, there are 1 or 2 other differences in there as well, but this shows the basic mechanism. You can decide which style sheet will get applied, and it'll automatically pick the right one based on the type of medium that you're actually displaying on at that particular moment. You can also import rules. So here, I've imported another style sheet that defines the common features, whether it's displayed on the screen or on the printer. And again here, when you import a style sheet, you can define rules on your import directive. I've got an example here in comments. You could have an import statement like that, which would say, link in this style sheet if we're projecting on a screen that has color capabilities. So let's take a look at common-stylesheet.css. It illustrates a couple of more key features. First of all, there are some common rules that will apply regardless of the type of medium. And then what you can do, inside a style sheet, you can define rules which are targeting particular devices. And the way you do it is by using an @media syntax and then specifying the rule that defines the applicability of your statements. This is the general syntax here. I set up a media rule that says if we're projecting on a screen and the screen has a minimum width of 950 pixels, so it's at least that size, or if I'm projecting on a printer. So a comma means or. So either if that rule is true, or if that rule is true, then apply these rules here. So there are various different possibilities you can specify for the rules. The orientation, for example, whether it's portrait or landscape. If you want a full list of rules, then this is the website to go to. It describes all the possibilities for this kind of syntax here. Now, if I go down a little bit further, I've got another rule here that says if we're projecting on the screen, then the navigation area, so those were the hyperlinks that we saw, they will appear on the left-hand side of the web page, occupying 25% of the width. So when I open my page in a browser on the screen, we see the navigation area here. I'll go back into my style sheet and I'll scroll down a little. As I've set up some more rules here that specify if I'm not projecting on the screen, so there's a logical not operator. So for example, if I'm projecting on a printer or anything that's not the screen, then the navigation area is hidden. And that's why when I try to print the web page, we don't see the navigation area. I've got another rule defined here so that the main content of the page occupies the whole width instead. So again, to remind you, if I go into print preview, so Control P, there's no navigation area on the left hand side, and the main section occupies the entire width of the web page. Okay, so you can define rules inside the media block like this, which will only get executed if this test is true. Now there's one more interesting thing to look at, and that's the effect that we saw when the web page in the browser shrunk below a certain size. We have a capability called media query listeners, whereby you can define some rules and have events triggered when those rules become true or when they become false. Let me show you how that works. It's in my document.html. So first of all, I'll take you to the bottom of this web page to show you some of the key features. So first of all, there's a figure here called the figure that displays the two pictures in normal usage. So that's the figure here with the two icons displayed there. And there's also a header which is displayed a little bit higher. And that header is called message area. And that's the message area here that will display status messages as the example unfolds. So let me take you back into the code. The script section here, there's a function that gets executed when the web page is loaded. First of all, it just sets up some global variables to refer to the message area and to the figure. Now, there's a property on window called match media. If your window supports this, then you can define rules that will dynamically and responsively adapt based on what the device's capabilities are. So in this example, if the match media property is supported, we display a message indicating that the browser supports match media. If not, we display a message indicating that the browser doesn't support match media. So back in the browser, if I would just press F5 to refresh the view, initially this is the message we see. Our browser does support match media. Back into the code, what I then do is I take the match media and I set up a rule. This rule is similar to what we've seen just now. Basically, it'll say any changes on the truth or the falsehood of the outcome will be picked up by an event handler. So if we're projecting on the screen and the minimum width is 950 pixels, or if we're projecting on a printer, that's my query, and I can add a listener onto that query such that, for example, if the width of the screen becomes less than 950, it'll realize that and it'll call this function to tell me that this rule is no longer true. It happens in both directions as well. If that rule was false and then suddenly it becomes true, for example, if I make the window bigger, then again, it'll call this function. So this function tells me either the window's got smaller or bigger than it was. So let's take a look at that function up above. The function receives a media query listener object, and you can invoke the matches property on this to figure out whether the test that you specified is now true or whether it's now false. So if our test matches, that means that we are either on a screen which has a minimum width of 950, or we're on a printer. In that case, I want the images to be displayed. So I take the figure element and I set its display style to be block. In other words, when the screen or the printer has a certain size, then display the figures. However, if the screen is too small, or we're not projecting on the printer, then in that case, it hides the figures. So that concludes the lesson. I'll just summarize the key points. First of all, you can have multiple style sheets, and each style sheet can have a media property that indicates the rules of applicability. When should this style sheet be executed? Inside those style sheets, you can also set up rules. So for example, in commonstylesheet.css, we had rules like this. If we're not projecting on the screen, then apply these rules here. And then finally, we've seen inside your JavaScript, we've seen how you can handle changes in a media query list. You can set up a watch media with a test and have a callback function that will be called automatically when the test becomes true or false, so that you can dynamically adapt the user interface based on the current capabilities of the device.